I'm Dan Klaidman. I was the Washington bureau chief at Newsweek when 9/11 happened. I remember that morning I'd come in from the gym, had gotten to the office just around 9 o'clock, and I flipped on my television, and there was this astonishing news about a plane that had crashed into the World Trade Center. You know, at a news magazine, it's not like a newspaper where you're immediately going to be covering the news. You sort of sit back and try to figure out, well, what are we going to do here? How are we going to cover this? And while we were having conversations about this and thinking about how to organize the reporting, Evan Thomas, my longtime colleague and former bureau chief, Washington bureau chief at Newsweek, came running into my office, and I remember so vividly he was pointing out the window. My office overlooked the mall, the White House, and some of the kind of iconic monuments of Washington. And Evan was pointing out the window, and he's just said, "We're under attack." I looked out the window, and for the first time, I noticed that way off in the distance, there was a kind of a low-slung, oddly shaped building, and there was a fireball sitting on top of it, smoke billowing out from behind it. It was the Pentagon. I'd never noticed it. I'd been there for 9 months, and I'd never noticed the Pentagon. You could see it looking out my window. And it was an extraordinary moment. Those words, "we're under attack," made you realize this was more than just an act of terrorism. In a sense, we were going to be at war. And of course, throughout the day, the imagery and language of war continued. I remember another reporter, actually it may have been Evan as well, coming to me. He had just gotten off the phone with one of his national security sources. And I remember him saying, "Everyone's talking about homeland defense." That's the word that people in the government are using. And it had this kind of quaint British sort of World War II sound to it. But on the other hand, it hit home that this enormous sense of vulnerability. The homeland was no longer secure. And so we had to figure out what to do. Mark Whitaker, who was then the editor of the magazine, he got a call from Don Graham, the CEO of the Washington Post, at that point owned Newsweek. And Don said to Mark, "What are you thinking?" And Mark said, "Well, the one thing I know is we can't wait till the weekend to publish. That would have been our normal schedule. We have to publish now." And so we did Newsweek's first extra edition. In 70 years of its history, it had never done anything like this before. We had essentially 24 hours to put out a magazine on this enormous and complex event. And so it was all hands on deck. Everyone was reporting. And we produced a pretty amazing first issue. One of the things I very distinctly remember from that issue was we had a terrific researcher named Lucy Shackelford, and Lucy had a distant family relation, a woman whose husband had been on Flight 93, the plane that crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. And Lucy was able to get to this woman. Her name was Liz Glick. Her husband, Jeremy Glick, was on Flight 93. He'd managed to call her while the plane was still aloft after it had been hijacked to tell her what was going on. And as Liz Glick told the story, her husband said, "We've got a last-ditch plan. We're going to try to rush the hijackers, take control of the plane." And as Liz Glick continued to describe this, we were, by the way, all huddled around the speakerphone in my office, me and about a half a dozen reporters interviewing her. And she described it, she said, in real time, while she still had him on the phone, this gambit to retake the plane actually happened. She said there was silence, then there were screams, then there was more silence, then again screams, and then there was nothing. And Evan Thomas, who was also there with me, he began choking up. He later told me that what moved him so much was that for that whole day, everything we were hearing was how we were victims, how we were vulnerable, how we were insecure. That was the first moment, the first evidence that some Americans, some very brave Americans, had fought back. And he found that very moving. And of course, it is very likely that in doing that, in diverting the plane from its intended target, either the White House or the Capitol, as we later learned, those few passengers on that plane, including Jeremy Glick, had saved hundreds of lives.